Okay, we still do have some people coming in and I'll keep letting them in, but I want to get it started because I know we have about an hour for this and everyone's time is valuable. So thank you for coming today. My name is Jackie Trapp. I am the Director of Community Outreach at Ruth and Norman Rales Jewish Family Services. We are offering this stress and anxiety panel to hopefully allow, some of you have already sent in questions. We're hopefully going to be able to answer some of those questions, teach you a little bit about stress and anxiety and what you can all do to help yourselves. It is National Stress and Anxiety Awareness Month, so it's a perfect month to be doing this, so we could just all learn a little bit more. We are fortunate to have 3 people on our panel today, so I wanted to just briefly give some information about them so you guys can get to know them before we start. Our first one is Heather Moraldo. Heather is the lead career strategist for the Career and Employment Services Department at Ruth and Norman Rales Jewish Family Services. She received her MSW from Florida International University and holds a BS in Communication from the University of Miami. Prior to joining JFS, Heather worked as an in-home therapist and group home social worker for a Jewish adoption agency in South Florida. She is a lifelong learner, good communicator, and relationship builder with exceptional skills in planning, resolving conflicts, and solving diverse problems. Heather is empathetic and passionate and has extensive experience in researching and locating resources to empower and assist her clients in moving their lives forward. Thank you for being with us, Heather. Next, we have Lori Conglos. Lori is a licensed mental health counselor and the director of the JFS Domestic Abuse Department. Lori counsels survivors, helping them to cope with their anxiety and fears using trauma-informed CBT and mindfulness practices. Thank you also to Lori. And lastly, we have Ariel Mansour. She received her bachelor's and master's degree in social work from Florida Atlantic University. She began her social work experience by interning at a treatment center for women suffering from substance use disorder and co-occurring disorders, where she facilitated therapy groups and provided support for the clients. Ariel continued her experience at Ruth and Norman Rales Jewish Family Services as a clinical intern. Here she provided counseling services for children, adolescents, families, couples, and adults. After completing her internship and acquiring her MSW in 2019, Ariel was hired as a community outreach coordinator at JFS. Ariel works closely with the South Palm Beach community to provide support groups, one-on-one counseling, case management, and much more. So thank you, Ariel. So a lot of people have already sent in questions. We want to thank you in advance for all of you that had an opportunity to do that already. We want this to be interactive. We hope you do get a chance to learn from this. So please, if you do have any questions that come up, you could also write them in the chat box. If it relates to the question, we'll answer it right away. If not, we might hold off till the end. And we hopefully will be able to have time for that. Otherwise, we will go right into the questions to start a little bit. So Lori, can you tell us what stress and anxiety is? And also a little bit about the difference between anxiety and a natural fear of response.
Okay, sure. So that's a really great question because we use those two terms interchangeably a lot. We'll say we're stressed or we feel a lot of anxiety, and really there is a difference. They're not the same thing. So stress is basically a physical response to usually directly related to exterior or external circumstances. So life circumstances, work-related, relationship-related, medical-related, physical-related, whatever is in our environment or our life circumstances will cause us a stress response. And so stress is most of the time easier to work with because we have a little bit, and we'll talk probably more about this later, but we have a little bit more control about our external circumstances, where anxiety is related to excessive worrying about possible future events, which are really we're like creating a world that doesn't really exist. And we are spending a lot of time thinking about a lot of what ifs. And so we get preoccupied with a future, living in the future versus the present moment. So maybe a little bit more simply stated, stress is usually related to the present moment, and anxiety is when we're not present, when we're worried about future events. And then was there a second part? Oh, I can't hear you, Jackie.
I'm muted, sorry. Also, a little bit about a difference between anxiety and the natural fear of response.
Okay, so our body and our mind doesn't really know the difference when we're feeling that response. Fear is a mechanism that is naturally based in our parasympathetic system. So it's a response system to a danger. So common metaphor is bear jumps out in front of us in the woods, and the fear response is activated. And so we're able to either fight, flight, or fawn, are our responses. So that would be a real fear response. Anxiety, we experience those same responses, but there's not a real external stimulus. It's only in our mind.
Thank you, Lori.
Okay.
Ariel, can you tell us a little bit about what a coping technique, and can you share some examples of healthy versus unhealthy coping techniques?
Yes, of course. So yeah, before I even go into healthy versus unhealthy coping, it's important to know what a coping technique is, because I think we oftentimes hear the word thrown around: coping technique, coping mechanism, coping skills. And it's kind of hard to know sometimes, like, what exactly does it mean to cope? And I think for every single person, it's something different. So what an action that helps one person cope might be completely different for someone else. So firstly, there really is no exact definition of like what your coping technique is. So it's a good reminder to know that, you know, for you, something might be helpful to you to cope, but for someone else, it might be completely different. But the definition of what a coping skill or technique or mechanism, whatever you want to call it, is all it is what we do to manage our emotions in a certain moment. So many of the things that we do every single day, we might not even realize is a part of coping. You know, if we step away and we take a deep breath, if we listen to put on relaxing music because it makes us feel good, all of that is probably coping, because we're just doing it to manage our emotions in that moment. So then to go more into healthy versus unhealthy coping techniques, the clinical term that we usually use is adaptive versus maladaptive coping. So adaptive is healthy / positive coping, while maladaptive is not as healthy, sometimes negative coping techniques. And something I always like to add in is that whether you are practicing a healthy or unhealthy coping technique, you are still coping. So we, of course, ideally, we want to have a healthy coping technique, but if sometimes we engage in an unhealthy coping technique, it still means we're putting effort into just make ourselves feel better and manage our emotions. So, you know, we don't always have to feel bad if we do have negative coping techniques or unhealthy coping techniques, or maladaptive coping techniques, because we still are putting effort into coping. But of course, ideally, we want to work towards using more healthy coping mechanisms. So examples of adaptive and healthy coping mechanisms could be, you know, going to our support system and reaching out, you know, to the people that we're close to just talk about things, going for a run, doing yoga, exercising, doing deep breathing, meditation, sometimes we'll trying to solve a problem. Maybe we use humor, we laugh at, you know, negative situations to get through it, taking a break or just pausing, you know, before we react. So all of those are really healthy coping techniques. Anything that, you know, once we do it, it's going to only continue to benefit us, right? It's not just making us feel better in that moment, but it's going to benefit us in the long run. Now, when it comes to maladaptive and maybe more unhealthy coping techniques, those are usually counterproductive, or there's some sort of negative consequence that comes along with it. So for example, drinking alcohol, using drugs, binging on food, making an impulsive decision, and then in even some cases, self-harm. So all of these things, are really probably in the moment they make us feel good, but they're going to have negative consequences in the long run. So again, if once in a while we want to have a drink to make ourselves feel better, if we make a negative, not the best decision here or there, that's okay. Everything in moderation is okay. But ideally, we want to substitute those negative coping skills for something positive. So instead of, having some wine before bed to get to bed, maybe we do a meditation, maybe we take some deep breaths, maybe we watch a show that makes us feel good. So, just slowly kind of trying to alter those negative coping mechanisms into something more positive.
Thank you. Heather, can you share what mindfulness is and how it can help somebody with anxiety?
Sure. So mindfulness is, a term that we hear a lot these days. And so it's really important that you understand kind of the basis of it. So it really stems a lot from kind of what Lori was saying earlier about the different, world that you create when you're constantly thinking about and worrying about your future. Okay, so, a lot of times they consider anxiety worrying about the future, and sometimes they think of, depression as, thinking and being in the past. So if you find yourself, where these are, obviously people think about memories and people, think about and plan things, but it's when these things start to really interfere with your life and your daily day to day, where some of these thoughts can become, overwhelming, a lot more than the other thoughts that are throughout the day. So if you see yourself, realizing that throughout the day you're really focused on the future, then that means, your thoughts are very anxious. And if you're thinking kind of, about everything that happened in the past, then, you might have some depression symptoms. So it's important that you kind of figure out, where your thought process is at, because mindfulness is really all about the present moment, right? So it's not about the future, it's not about the past, it's what are we doing right now in this moment. Right now we're all, we're in this together, we're sitting here, you're listening to me speak, and that's exactly what we're doing now. So sometimes just taking a moment to really think about what it is that you're doing. And I sometimes I use like a rubber band, just a little snap or a hair thing, just to, or a rubber band works as well. You just snap yourself back into reality. It's that the mindfulness is about telling yourself, oh, I was thinking the future, but now I'm here, I'm in the present. So it's bringing yourself back. And that's that mindfulness, that practice that you constantly are going to work on. No one is perfect at it. Like I said, it's a practice. So it's something that it's hard to do. We find ourselves constantly daydreaming about future things, or even daydreaming about things that happened in the past that we wish were happening now that aren't. So if you catch yourself doing those things, that's wonderful, because that means that you've been mindful. You're mindful of the fact that your mind has, escaped, and you bring it back. Once you bring it back, and you constantly are thinking about what you're doing in the present moment, you won't have time. Once it becomes more of a practice, you won't have time to think about what may happen or what may not happen in the future, because you're in the groove of things. You're sometimes when we're driving and we notice we get to our location, we don't even know how we got there. How many of us have done that? It's really hard where we just get to the location and we're like, oh my God, did I take the highway? Did I take, and that's because we're on autopilot. So being mindful is I'm holding the steering wheel right now. I'm stopping at this stoplight. I'm going to make a right onto the freeway. So it's just about taking in everything around you and really identifying that. And so that helps with the anxiety, because like I said, it gives you less time to think and dwell on what may or may not be. And, it's like I said, it's a practice. So it's something hard and something you shouldn't get very angry at yourself. I know when I first started, I would get mad, like, oh, I wasn't being mindful. I was, daydreaming. But that's the whole wonderful part of it. So you should celebrate those moments. And I think that it's just, it's you have to be really kind with yourself when you're working on that. So.
Thank you, Heather. Ariel, oftentimes people may think they need medication to help with anxiety. How can a person tell if they should speak to their doctor or psychiatrist?
Thank you. That's a good question. So when we start looking at our situation in our life and we realize that our anxiety or our stress is starting to really significantly affect our ability to function in our daily life, like if we are not able to work, to get our work done, if we're feeling like paralyzed by our anxiety, if our relationships are suffering, if our health starts deteriorating, sometimes our stress and our anxiety gets so severe that, we start having health issues. That's when it's probably time to say, you know what, I need to reach out to a doctor or a psychiatrist, ideally, and talk about the possibility of taking medication. And it's important to note that there's absolutely no shame in reaching out to talk about medication and to actually take medication. Just like diabetes, just like a heart medication, a lot of us, it's essential for us, and then there's nothing wrong with that. It's just something that we need, whether we're dealing with a situation or maybe we just have a chemical imbalance in our brain, which a lot of people do. Sometimes that's genetic, sometimes it's just how we were born, and no matter how much therapy we go to and how many coping skills we do, sometimes we just can't look at the world logically, and our thoughts are taking us over. Depression is taking us over, and there might not even be a reason for it. It's just for some reason we're feeling that way. And what medication can do is it can just help balance out those chemicals, because I'm sure many of you know about dopamine and serotonin and cortisol and all these different things that make us feel the way we feel. And sometimes for some reason they're just off, and medication can help balance that out. So just to give you a little information about those psychiatric medications, because it is good to know about that as well. So really the most common medications that are prescribed for anxiety are actually antidepressants. So if you go to the doctor and you're like, wait a minute, I'm here for anxiety, why are you prescribing me an antidepressant? Isn't that for depression? Actually, the majority of them, while they can treat depression, they also treat anxiety very, very well. And those would be your SSRIs, your selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So examples of those that you've probably heard of is Zoloft, Lexapro, Prozac. And the point of those medications is that they're intended to help people manage anxiety in the long run. So for those of us who are just dealing with anxiety on a daily basis, maybe we have a situation that's really difficult and we are just in the long run, we want to, feel a little bit better. It's not just a one situation type of thing. That's when we would be prescribed an SSRI, an antidepressant. And they're really helpful. They do take a couple weeks to even start working. So if you are ever prescribed one of these, know that you're not going to feel better right away. It does take a couple weeks for your body to get used to it. It's important to take it every single day, at the right time. And then just to talk about the other types of anxiety medications that I think people are more aware of, and maybe there's a lot of assumptions out there that this is what you're supposed to take for anxiety, are the benzodiazepines, which include Xanax, Ativan, Klonopin. And while those are used to treat anxiety, those are used or should be used in the short term. And it's for situational intense anxiety, like for a brief period of time. So if we have a severe, fear of flying on airplanes, if we are really scared of the doctor, or, we have a surgery coming up, that's when it might be good to say, what, I'm gonna, have a prescription for Xanax, because I just take it in that one moment when I am having that severe anxiety. The reason that we don't want to take that type of medication regularly is because there are really dangerous side effects. And the main one is dependency and addiction. Those medications are very, very addicting. And that is definitely something we want to avoid. SSRIs have their own side effects as well, but they are not nearly as dangerous. And that's something you would talk to a doctor about. But it is important to know about those side effects and you know, kind of the pros and cons of taking medication. And that's it.
Thank you, Ariel. I do want to go back to the mindfulness. Barbara did share a tip also that I think could be good. She says when she needs to bring herself back, she looks around where she is and names everything. For example, I see my couch, here's the dog. So next I see the TV. So Barbara, that's a great example of just reminding yourself of where you are right now and taking it in. So thank you for sharing. And then back to the medication piece too. We do understand that a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here today, whether it's coping skills, medication, just tips or tools, whatever it might be, not everything works for everybody. So people are always going to have to try different things. You know, at being a therapist, and I'm sure the other people on the panel can agree, we've heard the saying, sometimes you have to shop around for a therapist, right? So you sometimes not even the person you're talking to is the right person for you, and that's okay. The first step is knowing that you need to talk to somebody or want to talk to somebody. And once you're able to do that, it does sometimes take time to find the right person, just like, you know, it will take the same time to find the right medication that works for you or doesn't work for you or anything like that. So I just want to make sure everyone knows that.
Yes, and to bounce off that as well, yeah, it's very true. One medication might be amazing for someone and it might be completely awful for someone else. So unfortunately, sometimes we have to try and it could take a while to figure out what works for us. But a good tip is to reach out to your close family members, your family by blood, to see if any of them have ever taken antidepressants that have been helpful for them, because there is a genetic connection. So if you have a mother or a child who has taken medication and it works really well for them, a lot of the time that's what you're going to be prescribed first. So it's good to bring that up if you do talk to a doctor.
Yeah, that's a great point too. I do know that many family doctors are able to do that test now also, and most private insurances do cover that. So that is something to speak to your doctor about. So thank you. Lori, many people report that their anxiety and stress keep them up at night. How can someone unwind and calm their brain?
Okay, so I'm going to go to the opposite end of the spectrum from medication. And I love this question. So, because we think of sleep a lot of times as we wait until we're just exhausted and we fall to sleep. And what we want to do is prepare ourselves for sleep. So sleep is a state of consciousness. So we've got the waking state, we've got the sleep state, and we've got deep sleep. And our mind does not know the difference. So that's why a lot of times we will even wake ourselves up at night. Maybe we were running in bed, or our body will jump, right? Or we wake up in the morning and maybe we wake up in a really good mood and we don't have any idea why. We just woke up in a good mood. Or the opposite, we wake up in a bad mood and have really no reason for it. And all that's related to our sleep state. So instead of falling into sleep, we want to prepare ourselves for that journey, just like we were going on a trip. We want to get ourselves ready for that state of consciousness. So if our mind is active and we are doing a lot of things to stimulate our mind, including stimulants like caffeine at the end of the day, or watching television in the evenings, or even really challenging conversations or work or anything that's stimulating your mind, when you fall asleep doing those things, or even doing them previous to falling asleep, your mind, so it was going like this before you fell asleep, and when you fell into the sleep state, your mind just keeps going. right? So you could sleep 7, 8 hours even and wake up and still be tired because you never get that deep, you never go into the deep sleep. So what we want to do is prepare ourselves. So ideally, we want to start doing that 1 to 2 hours before we plan to go to sleep. So that means at that time, we create a ritual. And it doesn't have to be anything grand, it doesn't have to be a big ritual, but something that our body knows and recognizes that we're preparing for sleep. So, and we also want to start quieting the mind. So instead of reading, we might do some breath work, or we might listen to some really relaxing music, or maybe, sit outside on the patio and just take a few moments to do nothing. Nothing to stimulate the mind. Take time to take a warm shower, or take a warm bath, maybe drink some decaffeinated tea, something, whatever is soothing to you, so that you're preparing yourself. Your mind is going to be much quieter once you do transition into the sleep state. You're going to sleep a lot better, and you're going to feel much better when you wake up in the morning. And if you do the same thing every evening, create that ritual for yourself, your mind will start to recognize it. When you start doing those actions to prepare yourself, you do it over and over again. So just like, Heather mentioned driving a car, and how most of us have probably been in our car on our way to Publix, and we get there and we have no idea how we got there, right? We're on autopilot because our mind was
Hi, Dad. How are you?
our mind was able to do that without preparation. The same thing can happen moving into the sleep state, right? If we do the same thing, the same ritual every evening, it will become automatic, and the mind will start quieting down, and we will literally transition into that sleep state.
Thank you, Lori.
You're welcome.
So, Ariel, what is the best way for someone to cope with their anxiety when they are not able to live their life how they typically do or would like to?
That is a good question. Very often we're going to find ourselves in anxiety provoking situations in our life that we cannot change. So for example, like for a child, right? If they're living in a difficult home, maybe their parents aren't so present and that's causing them anxiety. They can't leave the home, they need to have care. Maybe, and another example is if we have a big family and we're living in a really small house, but we can't afford to live somewhere else. Maybe, I can name so many different situations where, we've exhausted all of our options and there's just nothing we could do about this really bad situation that we're in. So, these issues that are clearly unsolvable, sometimes we just have to ask ourselves, what can I control and what can't I control? And I mean, this question is pretty much asking about those things that we have no control over. Sometimes we just have to look at it and say, you know what, I don't have control over this. So what is it that I do have control over, right? Even if my situation sucks, I wish it was so different. I can't, there's just nothing I can do. I've tried everything. I've tried this, I tried that. There's financial issues, there's family issues, and I just can't change it. So what is it that I can control? And like just some examples are that we can control in pretty much any situation is our perspective on the situation, where we direct our energy, right? Are we directing our energy towards all the problems, or maybe to good things we have in our life, or, self-care practices? We can control how we manage our own emotions, and it's not easy, but we do have control over it. And, it's a lot about what we're talking about today. We can control asking for help, right? Maybe there's a social service agency out there. Maybe there's a friend, maybe there's family, someone who, is there someone out there that can help us? How we treat our own bodies. So eating healthy food, exercising, that is something that we mostly have control over. I know financially it can be hard, but that is an area that we have a good amount of control over, and what we really make about what we make out of our situation. So can we find the positives in this, right? And even the worst situations out there, we can look into and we can say, there's a positive in this. Maybe I've grown. Maybe I've learned a big lesson. Maybe I've become more resilient. Maybe I'm a stronger person. Maybe it's opened me up to something new. So we can, start to shift our perspective and say, how am I going to make the best out of this situation? Because I can't change it. There's nothing I can do, to change it. So, and then I guess the last thing I would say is also just working towards acceptance of whatever it is that, we're dealing with. Because I think kind of the question is asking, if we can't live our life the way we want to, or we can't be in the place we want to, maybe we're not ideally in a location we want to, maybe the house we're in is no good, but we've exhausted all the options. Maybe we can just work towards accepting it, because what is our other choice, right? Our other choice is probably just being very stressed and sad and frustrated. So working towards acceptance, which is a whole other conversation in itself of how we work towards acceptance, but just in a brief description, that's kind of some of the advice I would give to that type of situation.
Thank you, Ariel. I do want to thank you guys. You are definitely taking advantage of the chat, so we really appreciate it. Just to go back to make sure everything's being seen, Jay, I know you mentioned sometimes it can be hard to find a psychiatrist that is available. So please keep in mind, JFS does have those resources available. You can always speak to your primary care physician. As Ariel wrote in the chat, they are able to prescribe medication, although we do always recommend that you do see a psychiatrist. So JFS has that program available. We have more affordable prices in the community, and we could also offer some subsidies if you qualify for that. So Ariel put our number on there. At the end of the session, I will also make sure you have our contact information in case you need anything. Also, Laura, thank you. You're putting out some great resources too. Redshift programs for people who are on their computer screens in the evenings. This is great for people who are affected by the blue light. So thank you guys. We really appreciate this, because we could all always learn from each other, which I think is really important. So Heather, speaking of how we're learning from each other, sometimes people say that stress can make them more productive or less productive. Can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. So it really kind of depends on the kind of person you are and how stress affects you. So sometimes stress can overwhelm you, and we like to say analysis by paralysis, right? And you are constantly thinking about everything and you're paralyzed in that thought. And then that's kind of, where that productivity kind of goes down the tubes. And then there are types of people where under that stress, under that pressure, are, using that and fueling that to get things done and be really, really, really busy. Right. And so that's not great either, because we've learned being really busy and not taking care of ourselves, as well as we should. And filling up our cup is not necessarily, a good way to live life either. So it's really in that balance area where it becomes, where we just need to manage that stress. Right. So it's not making us so it's not pushing us to become so productive where we're not taking a break for ourselves, and where it's not, paralyzing us and not allowing us to move forward. So using stress productively, there are ways to, cope with the stress. People use, exercise as a way to get the stress out. So, if you've been really stressed out, maybe take a kickboxing class. Singing could be a way to, express yourself, maybe drawing or doing some art. But finding a way that you can express yourself will be a way to use that stress productively. Also, you really want to think about what you can and cannot control in this situation. So a really good tool and, a technique that I like to use is to put a circle on a page, and then anything outside that circle in the situation is what you would put that's out of your control, right? What is out of your control? then everything in the situation that's in your control, you'd put that in the smaller circle, right? And you're only going to focus on that inner circle because that's the only thing you can control, right? You can't control other people's reactions. You can't control other people's opinions. You can only control your reactions, your actions. And with that said, using that time to think about all the options of what could be and what couldn't be is a waste of time. I mean, it doesn't feel like it in the moment. You feel like you have to kind of mull through all these things. But when you think about it, it is. And I like to, kind of come up. I found this quote that really, people really from all different walks of life understand it because it's something we all kind of have to deal with. But it's worry is an interest paid in advance on a debt you may never owe. Okay, so it's worry is an interest paid in advance on a debt that you may never owe. Okay, so it's interesting to think of it like that because you really, you don't necessarily need to think that far ahead about every little thing. And, sometimes just focusing quickly on what you can control in the situation is a great way to kind of de-stress and, move forward and be productive.
Thank you, Heather. Everyone's getting very talkative in the chat, so I'm trying to stay up to date on that too. We are going to touch, I think, more towards the end. We go into a little bit more about the pandemic, so we will touch base on that. So I just want to let you know. One of the other things that somebody asked me directly was about CBT. I'm not sure if Ariel mentioned it today. No, when we did this panel yesterday, one of the things that she shared when speaking about medication is even if medication is recommended for you, it's also recommended to be in some kind of talk therapy too. So in particular, somebody wanted to talk about CBT therapy. So that's cognitive behavioral therapy. Do any of the panelists want to share a little bit about what that is?
Sure. Yeah. So cognitive behavioral therapy, that's what it stands for. And just off the top of my head, the idea of it is to change our automatic thoughts. I guess that's kind of like the simple description. So we all naturally have automatic negative thoughts that pop in our head in every situation. And the way that it works is when we have a negative thought, we then have a negative feeling that accompanies it, right? So if I think something, I might feel anxious, I might feel sad, I might feel angry. And then what comes along with the feeling is an action, right? So maybe my action is avoiding things. Maybe it's drinking alcohol, right? So what ends up happening is we end up finding ourselves in these cycles. So the point of cognitive behavioral therapy is to break this cycle by challenging those negative thoughts. And there's different techniques as to how we challenge those thoughts. We can question them, we can journal, and we can kind of work through those thoughts. And then what happens is once we challenge the thought, we realize, okay, now I feel a little bit better. And now maybe my action is not as negative of an action. So that's kind of a simple, a simple way of describing what CBT is. I don't know if any of the other panelists want to add on to that, but I guess that would be my sort of brief description.
I think that's perfect. Thank you. Actually, there's a cartoon that I mentioned the other day, and it's like a few people lining up for a bus. And it's a good example, I think, of CBT therapy. And the first person is like, oh, I'm going to be late for work. The next person is like, I bet you the bus driver isn't going to be able to give me change, and so like they're all kind of, everyone has something they're upset about. And then there's someone at the end and he goes, yay, I'm going on the bus. And I think that's a good perspective. It's a cute little way to show you how when you change your way to think, it could change the entire way your day is also. So I think it's a cute example of it.
Yeah. And Jackie, there's another question in the chat. I don't know if any of the other panelists or if we want to answer later about panic attacks, but I'd be happy to add on to that.
Yeah, we have a few more questions. If you want to share something quickly about the panic attacks, we can, and then we could continue going.
Yeah. Well, the only reason I wanted to add on to it now is because we are talking about a lot of these coping techniques and CBT, for example. But when it comes to having a panic attack, the first thing we need to do is to ground ourselves and sort of calm our bodies down first, because CBT and some of these other coping techniques we're discussing are not going to work once we're in that full panic mode. So I do like to point that out. Like if you find yourself in that position, you're not going to want to start doing a CBT, worksheet, for example. You're going to want to do some grounding, which we could probably talk more about. I know Lori knows a lot of great things about grounding. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. And I do see some conversations also about emotional support animals. I agree with you what you guys are saying. They are a huge support. I see Heather has her thumbs up too. An animal can be a really big support. So it's a wonderful thing to have. Okay, we will keep going, but keep sending your comments and questions. So thank you. Lori, how does one keep stress and anxiety from affecting them physically?
So I'm thinking about the CBT as well. So I'm going to kind of just put this together because you can't keep stress from affecting you physically. We're multidimensional, mind, body, right, and spirit. So it all goes together. And our body, what stress is a physical response. That's what stress is. So if you're experiencing stress, you're experiencing it physically, right? There are physical reactions, and we all experience it differently. Some of us experience it, we might get headaches. Some of us might start shaking. Some of us, our heart will start beating faster. Some of us, can feel heat in our body. And this is why mindfulness practices are so important. So I do a lot of CBT with clients, but I do mindfulness-based CBT because before really you can start working with your thoughts and creating space, which is what we're looking for really between your thoughts and your actions, you have to be aware of your thoughts. You have to be aware of that separateness between you and your thoughts, and understand that thoughts are just thoughts. They're not even your thoughts. They're just thoughts that happen to enter into your mind, right? And most of our thoughts, I can't remember the statistic, but it's some up there in the thousands and thousands of thoughts that we have every single day. Most of them are the same thoughts we had yesterday, right? We just repeat them over and over again. And the thoughts enter into our mind for whatever reason, from a past, from a memory, from a song we heard on the radio, a movie we watched last week, a conversation we had. And it could have happened a week ago or a month ago, and it happens to create a thought. And then we have a physical reaction to that and may or may not take action on that thought. So that's kind of how I look at CBT is realizing that you're thinking, first of all, because most of us are on autopilot, right? Our thought comes in and we take action on it before we even are aware that we're thinking about anything. So first becoming aware of our thoughts, and then learning to create space between the thought and the action. And the way you do that is through mindfulness practices. And the more you practice mindfulness and body awareness, then you can catch the response, the stress response, before it reaches a panic attack, or before, if you're entertaining thoughts that are causing you anxiety and you're not even aware that you're thinking, right? You're going to experience anxiety and have a stress response. So I know we've mentioned this several times. I think all of us have talked a little bit about mindfulness, but and mindfulness sounds like something, you don't have to have a training in mindfulness. Mindfulness is really simple. It really is, all it is practicing being aware of your thoughts, right? first just being aware, and there's lots of different things you can do, but the easiest and the most accessible tool that you have is your breath. If you just stop and take 3 deep conscious breaths whenever you think about it. You can do it at the kitchen sink, you can do it at the red light, you can do it at any time you happen to think of it. You take 3 deep breaths. While you're doing that, you're present. Okay? And then there's lots of resources available to learn a little bit more about, once you're present, once you've brought yourself to the present moment, now we can practice body awareness. Now we can practice mindfulness. Now we can practice being aware of our thoughts and our emotions. So I think, did I answer the whole question?
I think so.
Okay.
Thank you. So I know somebody mentioned the pandemic. So kind of going off of that, Heather, the media often sends mixed messages on what is going on in the world. We've especially seen that this past year with COVID. How do we manage the stress we feel from this?
So the news is, definitely has been the topic of conversation this year, based on the fact that we were home a lot more than normal and glued to our televisions. This was, something that's never really happened before. We're all kind of experiencing this for the first time, and we are looking for answers. And so that, the media was, very able to take advantage of that by, putting things out there that, we hear, we're not sure what's real, what's fake, and that can cause some, anxiety. So it's important that, you look at your trusted sources, you do your research, you make sure that you are, finding the sources that are trusted, that you feel, confident in, and limiting that. So I remember in the beginning of the pandemic, the TVs were always on, and now they're never on, because we all got an overload of news. It was constant. We knew how many people were dying a day. It was really a lot of bad news, and there was no end in sight. And I think now we're starting to see some with these vaccines, but there is a lot of fear that comes with that as well. Now they're saying certain things about certain vaccines, and people are saying that they don't know a lot about. So there are a lot of fears still out there. But what's important is that you go to the trusted sources and that you limit the media, because the media's, their purpose is to, it's different than what it used to be. It's no longer, to get the news out, but it's to make money. So, there are also sources out there get to see so much that provide specifically just good news. And there really is a lot of, good things going on in the world, but we don't hear about them because our, just as a human, when we were first created, our brains were automatically wired to think negatively. And that's why it's so hard for us to, break through these new neural pathways and actually start to think a little bit more positively. And that's what that mindfulness practice does. It really tries to recreate these different pathways in your brain to help you to think, like we're talking about with this CBT, to think a little bit more differently. And so, and that's what we have to do kind of in these situations with the media. We have to think about, again, what we can control. We can't control what they put on the media, right? But we can control how much we're exposed to it. So limiting it to a certain period of time of the day. I don't even necessarily recommend right before bed, because then again, that's that, stress that may prohibit you from sleeping. So maybe you pick a time in the day where you get your selected news. But it's really good to limit it right now, just so that, you can take care of yourself, because it's really important to do so. And yes, Laura, I do know goodnewsnetwork.org. It is a wonderful resource. So thank you so much for sharing those. Everyone can definitely use a lot of good news in their days. So thank you for sharing those resources.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Laura. And Barbara, I like what you said, that, where is it? that you don't watch news, and if it's important, you will hear about it. That's very true too, right? Bad news travels fast. So it is not something you do have to go and search for. You definitely will hear about it. So thank you. Ariel, how does somebody cope with anxiety when they may also be feeling symptoms of depression?
So without going so much into, without going so much into, an entire kind of rant about coping with depression, because that would be, maybe we'll do a different event for that. A lot of the time, it's the same as anxiety when it comes to our coping, right? Maybe we use a lot of those same coping mechanisms. Maybe we reach out for medication in a situation like that. I think it's important to know that a lot of people suffer with both, and one might be causing the other. So sometimes when we're depressed, it might cause anxiety. Sometimes when we have severe anxiety, it might cause depression. So the two really do go hand in hand. And actually, I think 60% of people that deal with anxiety have some sort of depression symptoms, or do have depression. So really, it's important to know that it's super, super normal to be dealing with both. So again, a lot of those same coping mechanisms that we've spoken about, mindfulness, CBT, self-care, all these different things that we've talked about can be used for both anxiety and depression. It's definitely important to, if you're experiencing a lot of these symptoms, and again, they're, causing issues with your functioning, to work with a therapist or a psychiatrist. In my own bias, I'm going to say definitely a therapist would be very helpful. But if you only have access to a primary care practitioner, to maybe a local counselor, definitely reach out for help. And then, the both of you can really assess what the cause is of, the depression, of the anxiety, of these different symptoms, and what the right treatment plan is for you, because there are hundreds of thousands of different treatment plans, modalities, all these different things that can help with different mental health challenges. And what works for one person might not work for someone else. So we've mentioned a lot of these ones that are very commonly used and have, work for a lot of people, like CBT and meditation, but there's a lot of things out there. There is, I can't think of the word, when people, oh, never mind. I can't think of the word. When people change your mind, your brain and whatnot. I can't think of the word. But there's a lot of different things is my point. There's a lot of things, and there is a treatment out there for you. So if you haven't found the right thing and you're feeling very let down, there is so many different things, and it's good to seek it out. If you have trauma, there's a lot of really great trauma therapies, because trauma could be what's causing your anxiety or your depression. So keep looking, keep doing your own research, keep coming to things like this, talk to therapists, and you're going to be able to find what works for you.
Thank you. Those are all the questions that we did have sent in. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to type it in the chat, or if you want to, I know everyone's muted, so if you want to put your little hand up on the bottom, you could put a reaction, you can put your hand up and I can call on you. Otherwise, while I'm waiting to see if anyone has any questions, I didn't mean to send it so quickly, but I believe it went through about our financial self-care workshop. That is April 27th. So if anyone is interested, we do have that coming up available. I'm also going to add the PDF of all of our groups that we offer. Those are support groups in the community, as well as the programs at our career and employment services. So please take advantage and look at that. If our panelists want to share anything that maybe we didn't cover, and Ariel just commented that hypnosis was the word she was thinking of. Thank you. But any other comments? We do have a couple minutes left. Anything else anybody wants to share? Any questions? Laura is asking, how do you tell if a psychologist is a good match? Is it normal to feel even worse for a few days after talking to the psychologist? I see Ariel nodding her head. So do you want to take this one?
Yeah. So it is normal to feel worse after a first session or a first couple sessions. And the idea of that is sometimes things have to get worse before they get better, because if we have spent a lot of time maybe holding things in, or we haven't talked about it much, and then we walk into an office and we tell them all about our problems, we're going to leave there feeling really, sometimes really bad, because we just let it all out. And it's really, it's sad. And maybe there was a cathartic part of it, but sometimes that does feel bad. Now, if you continue to go and you're just continue to feel bad and you're not feeling a connection, because there is a connection you want to feel, and maybe you don't feel that you're empathized with, or you're maybe understood, that's where you might say, okay, this isn't a good match for me. No big deal. It is known that a therapist is only going to connect with 80% of the people that walk in their office. And it doesn't matter how good or bad or whatever the therapist is, we're just not going to connect with everyone. And that's totally normal. So like Jackie said, we might just need to shop for a therapist, try out a couple people. I know that could be hard because it feels like we have to start over, but there is a person out there for you. It's also good to look into certain therapies and also certain specialties. So if you see that a therapist specializes in something that you're going through specifically, that might be a great person to look out to. And then the last thing I want to mention is that you can ask you can interview a therapist. So when you're calling them, you can write down a bunch of questions and you could say, hey, do you specialize in this? Do you know information about this? What do you think about this thing? You can interview them, because at the end of the day, I guess they're kind of working for you. So feel free to ask questions before seeing a therapist, and knowing that there's nothing wrong with just not connecting with someone.
Thank you. While I wait to see if there's any other questions, I also put the main phone number to JFS. So don't forget, we have support groups, we have individual counseling, we have psychiatry. Heather is in our career and employment services. So they have a lot of wonderful programs available for people looking for jobs, helping to get you a job, anything like that. Lori runs our DV program, which has a lot of supportive services as well. So we have a lot to give to our community. So please take advantage of us. We will also be doing more of these programs. So I will keep everyone's email address when we do this in the future. We will contact you guys. So hopefully you will be able to be a part of the panels that we plan to continue to do. Also, if you want to, feel free to email me directly. I will also just make sure, in case I miss anyone, I'll make sure to know that you're interested. Please follow our Facebook page where all of our events are posted. So you will always see anything coming up, whether it's from a different department, that way you see everything. And all of this will eventually be on our YouTube page. I imagine in the next week or two, it would be available for everybody to view then. If there's no other questions, I want to thank everyone very much for your time. We really appreciate you being here. We hope that you found this beneficial, and we hope to see you guys all again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you all.